Hi, Brad.
Hi, Lulu.
So in today's Geek Time, I thought we continue to talk about Elon Musk.
All right.
Because he's done a lot of really outstanding things. I mean, really out there things, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, people, even if you're not into science technology, you've heard of things like SpaceX, Starlink. So I thought we can start with SpaceX. What does it actually do? And why is it so impressive?
Well, SpaceX was a company, it was started in 2002. The whole reason was there was a competition, and that competition was to design a rocket that could be sent into space and then reused within 2 weeks. And SpaceX was able to win that competition. But yeah, the whole idea is to reduce costs for putting things into space. Yeah, often referred to as a payload, but just something like people or in a satellite or parts for the space station, and do it in a cost-effective way.
So this was started by, what, the U.S. government? You said this competition.
I don't remember if the government started, but like the government wanted this because NASA could do a lot, but they had to have other people looking at this. NASA's kind of limited as to what it can and can't do. And so they wanted more of like the private sector to go out and start doing some of this stuff as well. And so this whole competition was created as a way to get that going.
So basically, private companies like SpaceX, they were competing in trying to make fully reusable rockets. You said reusable within 2 weeks.
Right.
What about the cost? Do they also reduce cost?
That's the whole point. It's like if you can reuse the rocket, then you can reduce the cost by a lot. SpaceX has been able to get their rocket launches down to about 67 million per launch, which is 10 times cheaper than what NASA has been able to do this far.
10 times, mainly because the rockets are reusable or immediately reusable. I see.
Yeah.
Okay. And now let's move on some of the specific products, shall we say, or plans. Let's walk through some of these plans or products so that our audience can get a basic understanding of what SpaceX is doing or has been doing.
Yeah, so like they have the Falcon rocket. The Falcon rocket really has 2 stages. It has the main stage, which starts the initial rocket launch. And that stage, once it disconnects, it actually lands back down. It's kind of like autonomous. And so once it launches and disconnects, it will go back down to the platform and it will use its own thrusters to land on the platform.
Oh, I see.
The other stage will come down on its own, but it doesn't have landing, so it will land usually in the water. So oftentimes the launches are not over land, but over water.
Both of these stages, you're talking about this rocket is a rocket that can carry payload.
Right. So those 2 stages get the payload out into space. Now, and that makes it really good because oftentimes that the rocket will land in the water, it will either sink in the water and create garbage or it will be destroyed by the impact, whereas this stage lands by itself. If it doesn't quite land perfectly, then it just goes into the water and they can get it right back because it's right there.
I see. So there's like a mobile sea platform for it.
It's basically just like a boat that's in the water that's autonomously controlled or controlled by someone at the center.
I'm just a bit curious. All of these are going to be out for commercial use in the future? So like if I had like a zillion, then I could literally just customize a rocket from them or just get them to build me a rocket?
I don't know if they'll actually be selling the rockets to people, but if you had something you wanted to put in space, you could contract SpaceX to use their rocket to send your satellite or your payload off into space.
I see. So you're basically renting the rockets as like some sort of courier service to send your payload into orbit.
Which is what the NASA has been doing as of recent to get satellites out because they're not using their own rockets at the moment. They might have actually gone back to that, but there was like a point when they weren't using any rockets. They were actually maybe renting rockets from Russia or something like that and sending their payloads that way.
But what if I had gazillion and then I would like to travel in space.
You could do that. There's a few different ways. Aside from the rocket, they have the spacecraft. Now,
Dragon spacecraft.
Yeah, SpaceX has the Dragon spacecraft, which can either do cargo or crew. They have a few different configurations. Their current configuration can carry up to 7 passengers into orbit. So you could go with a group of people up there. And this is very interesting because if you look at the competition, Jeff Bezos, the owner of, the leader of Amazon, he's been sending people into space, but he's only going to what's the first milestone that officially is space, which is it's 100 kilometers up into the atmosphere or just outside of the atmosphere. But that's not going to get you very far. You're just going to come back down to Earth right away. Whereas the Dragon spacecraft could be sent out to like the ISS, which is over 400 kilometers away from the Earth's surface.
ISS is the International
Space Station.
Yeah. Did you say 408 kilometers away?
Yeah, about 408.
I see. So it's much further than what Bezos was able to do. I was just wondering, the Dragon spacecraft, you said, can carry up to 7 passengers. So technically, I don't know if he's already doing this, but technically, he can just rent it out like some sort of, for people who want to have a trip into space, as long as they could afford it.
Right. Now, if you were going to go off into space and you were going to do that, you would have to have permission from like the government to go off into space. And so like with Bezos, he's often doing things like this where he has to get permission to do a launch and to send something into space. But yeah, if you're going to do it, as long as you have permission, then it's perfectly fine.
Okay. So that's Dragon spacecraft, which can carry up to 7 passengers into orbit. But what if more people want to go? There's like a Starship. We hear this a lot.
Now, Musk has been talking about going to Mars. You know, he really wants to populate Mars.
To colonize Mars.
So, to colonize Mars, yeah. But he's creating what's called the Starship rocket, or the Starship. And the Starship they've launched the first one. It was launched last year. But they're hoping that they can get this one down to about $10 million per launch, which is much cheaper than even the current launch. Okay. But they're thinking it'd probably be a little bit more expensive for larger carrying capacities. But they think their Starship should be able to carry up to 100 people to Mars.
But so far, he hasn't really successfully launched it yet, right?
Well, they've launched a smaller version. They're launching the prototypes. It's not quite like their spaceship, their Dragon spacecraft, but it's still in the testing phases. But it has launched. They have launched one. And so it's not that far into the future that we should be able to do this.
Wow.
The only issue with something like that is they'll probably have to send several rockets into space in advance for other materials. And then once they put several payloads into space, then they'll probably attach them to the Starship and then go to Mars.
I see. Wow. Elon Musk always strikes me as the type of person that is really coming from the future.
Yeah, he is a crazy person, and sometimes, like, the stories I hear about him are very intense. He works 20-hour days, and when people don't want to put in all that overtime, he thinks that they're weak people, but, like, he's just like a monster. He's
a working machine.
Some things I don't agree with, but you have to give him props for some of the things he does.
Yeah, exactly. So, that ends today's episode of just a little bit of intro to SpaceX. Next episode, I think we can focus on Starlink, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay. And if you have anything that you want to say on this topic, leave us a comment in the comment section or request any episode that you would want us to talk about in this segment. Thank you, Brad, for coming to the show.
No problem. See you next time, Lulu.
We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Welcome back. This is Brad. How are you doing, Lulu?
Hi, Brad. I'm fine, and I can't wait to hear more about Elon Musk. Last time we talked about SpaceX.
Uh-huh. Yeah, we're going to talk about something that's tangential to SpaceX. It's called Starlink.
Starlink.
And Starlink isn't a space program in the sense that space rockets and things like that. It's actually satellites. And SpaceX uses their rockets to put these Starlink satellites into space.
Which really created a buzz in all types of media, really. So what is Starlink about? You said Starlink is all about satellites, and one of the jobs of SpaceX is to send Starlink satellites into space. What are they used for, and what is the coverage?
Starlink is basically trying to cover the world with internet service. And so oftentimes there's a lot of cables that connect internet around people's homes. People at home have Wi-Fi and they can use cell phone service, but Starlink is going to bring basically internet service and wireless service now to people around the world using satellites.
I heard that the expectation, at least, is that it offers better internet connection than 5G.
Yeah. If you look at the connection, the internet connection, while in some cases it won't be as strong, it depends on line of sight and just how close you are to one of the satellites. But in general, it is faster than 5G. However, if you live in a city, because you're so close to the cell phone towers and there's a lot of connections around the city, you're probably going to get better service with mobile service than you would with Starlink. However, when you're in a van in the middle of nowhere and there's no cell phone service around, you could easily get access to Starlink.
I see. I have a question, though. Are there worries about, because obviously it's still Elon Musk's a private company, right? And it's not really like, for example, state-owned or something akin to that. Then don't people worry about when Elon Musk controls the internet?
Yeah. Well, of course, people will always be afraid of who is in control of it. In the US, you have all the internet is controlled by private companies anyways.
Oh, okay.
The internet is not something like power or water that's government controlled. Even in some cases, power and water has been sent off to private companies, and that's kind of scary. But yeah, companies in the US are kind of, in some ways, limiting what access people have to the internet.
Okay, but perhaps I should rephrase it, because Starlink is aiming to install or to build better internet connection than 5G, then obviously people would probably opt for the faster option. Wouldn't that bring with it some sort of monopoly issue? Like if he's monopolizing the fastest internet connection, that sort of worries.
Definitely, because if other companies start wanting to put satellites into space, there's going to be a lot of interruption. They're going to possibly smack into each other. It will create a lot of problems. And so there's probably going to be some sort of laws built around what he can and cannot do with the internet connection. But not yet, right? Because this is still in the infancy, and so no one has really looked at it and go, okay, we can see some problems here. But as of yet, there's not been anything to stop him from doing this.
Yeah. But talking about these satellites, they're not very big satellites, are they?
No, they're actually not that big. They might sound like they're quite big, but in comparison to a lot of the other satellites out there, they're quite small. Most of the satellites they're a little bit further away than the ISS, the space station that we talked about earlier. They're almost 600 kilometers away from the Earth, but they're 1,200 kilograms. While there are smaller satellites, they're not really all that big in comparison to what is actually out there in space. But the whole reason that they want to keep them small is just because they're kind of creating like this. You can kind of think about it as in like a mesh or like a cluster. They're not connected with like lines or anything like that, but they all connect to each other with lasers and line of sight, and because signals won't be as good, but they connect to each other in those ways and then can send data back to the Earth. It's just like a bunch of cell towers on the Earth.
I was just going to say, they're just like cell towers, but like in the space, right? Individually, they're not that big, but they form a mesh, like you said, like a web.
Yeah. So when you are moving around, you might connect to one satellite, and then, once you get closer to another one, you'll connect to that one. Same thing with the cell phone service.
Exactly. Yeah. So now this whole Starlink connection is already available, right? How do you, say I want to access it? How do we access it?
Well, you have to buy a modem or a satellite dish modem, basically. So people will buy them for their vans or people will buy them for their homes. The bigger one you get, the better kind of signal that you can get from the satellites. More surface area makes it easier for you to transmit data. But for people who are in a van, they can put, one of these dishes on the top of their van as they drive and use the internet as they drive around.
Okay. No, I was going to ask, how is it different from, we have satellite TV, right? And how's that different from that satellite dish?
It's not really any different. I think the kind of technology they use is more advanced because a lot of the old satellite networks, the signals they use are quite maybe a little bit different, but this is just basically a more advanced version of that.
Oh, I see. And so you install one of those satellite dish and then you can access.
Right. Now, that's not all it is. They also include, so there's a kind of signal that people use for their internet on their phones that connects to connects to the cell phone towers. But they'll also be getting this type of signal from the satellites as well. So people could actually just use a regular mobile phone or tablet and connect to the satellite cluster.
I see.
Yeah. Now, it is a little bit expensive right now. Oftentimes, for someone living in the city, it would be much cheaper to just get a mobile phone and internet service at home. But, for someone who lives in the countryside, who doesn't have access to a good connection, this would be an optimum choice.
Okay. And I think in the future, they're probably going to optimize it even more as well.
Probably.
Okay. But there are bound to be some problems, right? Apart from the whole monopoly thing, whether he's going to monopolize the internet connection, would there be any other problems that people are worried about?
Of course, there's always going to be problems. Anything you do will always have some sort of disadvantages. One of the big things is, especially for astronomers, it's going to create a lot of light pollution. Because you're going to have all these satellites going around. And oftentimes, if you look at the night sky, you might see something that looks like a star. And you realize, well, it's moving. What is that? And it's actually a satellite.
Aha.
Yeah. And so that's just something you can see with the naked eye from time to time. But people who are using telescopes, they're trying to look into space, but then these satellites are going to be getting in the way. And when you are trying to get the light from something light years away, and then you have a satellite that's bouncing light from the Earth or from the sun and it's getting in the way, it's going to make it so you can't see those other things.
Yeah, apart from the light pollution, I'm wondering, because although these are small satellites, but they still need to be launched, right? They need to be launched into the orbit by rockets. And each time, wouldn't that create some sort of rubbish, like space junk?
When the satellites are operational and moving as they should, we can control them. But these satellites will sometimes go out of commission. They could possibly drop in orbit and crash land onto Earth.
Okay, that doesn't sound good.
Or they might just float off in space, and they could be something that causes a problem for future space launches. I mean, the more satellites we put into space, the more there is that we have to worry about when we send a rocket up there. Yeah. So that does also cause problems.
I mean, it's still in the early days. I'm sure that they're thinking about hammering out all of these problems.
Oh, for sure. Definitely. But I mean, there's always people, are worried. Oftentimes, older satellites were put into one particular orbit, but with these satellites, they're being put all over. They're being put in orbit above cities and places where there weren't satellites very much before. And so they're covering most of the world orbits with satellites now. And so there's going to be, in the future, more and more chance that one of those is going to fall to Earth and at some point. Maybe it'll hit the water. maybe it'll hit someone's house. We never know.
Oh, wow. Thanks for the nightmare, Brad. And on that note, we're going to wrap up here. So this episode and the previous episode, we were giving you a very brief introduction to SpaceX and Starlink. If you want to share anything else on the subject, leave us a comment in the comments section. And thank you, Brad, for coming to the studio.
No problem. Thank you, Lulu. Have a good day.
We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, everyone.